joining us today. We wanted to share about who we are, basically our mission and our vision, and just tell you guys again, thank you so much for joining us. And oh, thank you, Fernando, so much for joining us today. Let me And well, guys, we've experienced life and we've been through a lot of experiences, but one main one that we lived together that changed our lives. And that was a car accident where we got um, hit head on by a drunk driver. Now, thankfully, that wasn't the end for us. And we've been through a lot that has helped us understand um, that we need to be real with ourselves. We need to be honest with ourselves in order to heal and to be able to overcome mental obstacles that come along with traumatic experiences. Now, the reason for We Can't Stop Won't Stop is we want to be able to provide the resources that have helped us and that also have helped friends of ours or community because we have only found that all of us go through similar things, similar situations that make us feel like we have to stop or that we should not believe in ourselves or that we should completely change our outlook on our passions and what we love. And the truth is that if we have the knowledge and if we have each other to share this knowledge, guys, the truth is we can heal ourselves and overcome these obstacles. The reason we are also very excited to introduce Fernando Campos. Hi, Fernando, ¿cómo estás?
Hello, happy to be here.
He is actually a huge inspiration for We Can't Stop Won't Stop, guys. Funny story is we were at House of Drums, and an underground dance event, and Fernando is actually one of the founders of it. And on this one night specifically, this had been very recent after the accident. um, I was still very afraid of moving and I was not too sure about like what my body could do, but I would still enjoy these events and I jumped in the cipher. I was obviously super nervous, like not very sure about myself. And then as soon as I stepped out and it's like you step out and you come back to the real world. The first thing that I heard was Fernando telling me, "Can't stop, won't stop, huh?" And I at that moment and at that point in life, it was just something that I needed to hear. And from then on, it kind of like became like, that little mantra, like, can't stop, won't stop, can't stop. And so it became extremely motivating, especially like when you hear it from an outside source, it pushes you. And so thank you, Fernando.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for being that for all of us, because like while that might have been a message that I think I was able to give you in like verbally, if I'm being honest, I feel like that was the message you were giving all of us by just being. So like the first person who said it was you to me, if I'm being honest, in action. I just got to say it to you back in words. But yeah, I that was it's awesome to be a part of that memory. And then to know that this has brought, this about. So appreciate it.
No, appreciate you, Fernanda. And I would also love for you to share with us a little bit more about you and your life as a dancer, just because this foundation is basically targeted towards dancers. It's obviously for artists and individuals that face trauma, but it's mainly by dancers for dancers. We're a community that does not receive a lot of support and a lot of help, and having to deal with therapy stuff and issues of people understanding me, my body, and my career, it it helped us be like, all right, there's some help needed here, and it would be really helpful, like for people to hear from you. And
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, as far as like my own dance journey, I mean, I've always been interested in dance. I'd always found it fascinating, let's say, but I always did it kind of privately. And I think part of it was that I always felt a little bit of, like insecurity. Like people would say I seem like an extrovert, but I always felt like I was like a shy extrovert. My work was in dance, my work was in partying, but like internally I was like, I want to go on that wall and just like stand there because it's terrifying out here in these circles out here in these streets. But it was something that I think allowed me to like express myself, and originally privately, and then as time went on I had more of a public platform and everything from there, which was phenomenal. And I mean, as far as the injuries that I've occurred, I want to say in my early 20s I had my Achilles rupture. Yeah. So I was actually performing for one of those, like those bar mitzvah groups, like I worked for Platinum Gold Entertainment back then, which is like a big one for like these bar mitzvahs and these parties. And so we were doing rehearsals, and I went to do a flip and my Achilles popped. And it was sort of kind of like what you mentioned. Like there was just, it's like you're everything, and then you're just go figure it out. Go figure it out. Like you don't get money from anyone to really help you with this. You don't, luckily the people who did the surgeries on me and everything was very helpful with all that. But yeah, going through an injury like that, especially when this is like your form of self-expression, it's like a singer losing their voice, it's like a painter losing their hands, or like your whole body is what you need for dance. And especially like that mobility, all that stuff is really difficult, and might have been one of like the earlier really challenging mental health issues for me, is having to just accept that you can't move in this way, that kind of thing. It's a really painful experience that I would never wish anyone to have. But oftentimes artists aren't recognized for what that can truly be. It's like, oh dang, that stinks. It's like, or dancers especially, oh, so like you, or you just, it's no big. It's like, no, it's not just that I can't walk, it's that I can't express. There's aspects of myself that I cannot be right now, and it's very challenging. So that being said, I'd always found myself really connected to the community, and to Brennan Eldom, or Shade, as a lot of people know. We were friends, and we've obviously still friends. But encountering with him, and then just so much very interesting things happen in life that led me towards a fascination of psychology. And then that psychology led me down this path, and this career of being a therapist and a supporter in the mental health community. um and definitely wanting to not only bring it back to people who aren't exposed to it, right, but I would say it's more than just like a set group of people. It's like in every culture there are groups of people where mental health is just not recognized for what it is. It's like if you cough and you, like, one time, it's kind of like, okay, no big deal. But if you're coughing every night, and you're coughing so much every night that you cannot get a good sleep, a good nights of sleep, and it's keeping you up, and eventually you'd be like, I gotta go get this cough checked out. It's like not allowing me to sleep. I'm restless, I'm up every night. So the same thing happens with like mental health. It's like we might have these coughs, we might have these blind spots, let's call them, that we either don't see at all, like the blind spots, right? And they're there, but the people who love us can see them and feel them. And if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we can feel them too, but we just can't see them. And then you have the more obvious ones, like the cough, which are these triggers, these things that our body tells us, that is something's going on. I don't like this, or something's off here. But we just sort of associate that as being like the normal way of life, as if everyone coughs at night like this, don't they? And then that question mark, I guess, is where I come in, where I'm like, no, not everyone coughs every night. let's talk about why you're coughing. Let's talk about where this cough came from, and I get why you would think that it's normal, or because it is in some ways normal, because a large population of people do that, right? But a large population of people are also unhealthy, or let's say obese, or like, just because it's normal, meaning a lot of people share in common with this thing, doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worth treating. And so, and I guess that's a really difficult thing for people to navigate, is that it's normal, meaning a lot of people talk like this, a lot of people feel this way, a lot of people are going through this experience. It's the average experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's like the healthiest. And not saying that they're unhealthy, it's just saying it's worth asking more questions, right? And that's where I'm super drawn into this conversation, and seeing where I can help people's potential increase. And not what I think that they can do for themselves. It's not about what I see in them. It's about what they see in them. And if I can be an entity that can help them to see more, and if it's in line with what I see, then great. But I'm sure that there are other areas of their own life that they don't even know that they would be phenomenal in, right? Well, I was a dancer. I never knew that I would be a better therapist until I started to study psychology. But how would I have ever known when I was doing backflips and windmills? And I apologize if cursing, that's just my natural way of speech,
Oh,
but we can bleep it out later, But like when I was doing these movements, never, yeah, never in my wildest dreams would I have known that I would be able to speak into the lives of others in such a profound way. So it's like, so then there's this need for exploration and everything. And so all of that, we were talking about it earlier, the journey outward, or the pilgrimage outward that people take, and this pilgrimage inward, is a huge one that I feel like is like a birthright for everyone. And I just want to be someone who helps in that path. But it did start with dance, because dance was the first place where I felt like I could express myself. It was also the first place where I felt like life wouldn't allow me to express myself in, and I had to go through that pain and that experience of it. So I'd say that dance, although I never made it to like the upper echelons of the dance community and imagery and that kind of thing, I was always present, and I was very much wanting to give back, but definitely receiving from the community and from the inspirations that people were, including yourself, right? So yeah, so that's kind of like what started this whole journey. And I have more details I could say about the beginning of things. And I only say this not to get any sort of like accolades, or any sort of like awes or sympathy or empathy in this, really. So like, I'm like a suicide survivor. I struggled with serious mental health issues when I was in my youth, and depressive states that were like shocking to me as well. And so the only reason I even mention that is because I never know who else feels that way or is interested in doing that thing. And everything that has happened to me beyond that experience has shown me how important it was that didn't happen. You know what I mean? But sometimes in that moment, it's hard to have that faith and all that stuff. And so like whoever is listening or watching it, it's important to know that, like, sometimes people talk to me and they're like, man, this guy's got all the answers. He's got all these things. And it's like, yeah, because I answered some of those questions wrong, if I'm being honest. And I learned from them. And luckily I learned from that experience as well. And so the don't is the right answer, for that question. But I can understand how difficult it is for people. And so I want them to know that there's relatability even in that, even in like the darkness. It's like there are others in the darkness, like have conversations, talk to a therapist, that kind of stuff. Because it is beautiful beyond that experience, even in thought and going through that stuff. But yeah, that's kind of like everything about me as a person there. There's obviously so much more aspects to who I am and everything, but that's really the origin story of dance transitioning into psychology, and therapy. And then here I am now with like my practice and, avant-garde therapy, shameless plug, right? Got to do that. And really just happy that I have the opportunity to help people is really where I'm at now. So there it is.
and I have to say this is why we had to bring you in, because there's maybe two or three types of people let me rewind. So trauma, when we say trauma, everybody wants to think of trauma like a physical thing.
Mhm.
But people forget, like what you said, like mental is not in the spectrum. It's like everybody's like, oh no, I went through trauma, like fell off my bike or something. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
trauma can go deeper, like into like childhood, adulthood, and it continues to grow. So there's 2 or 3 different type of people that I've seen, like in my line of work too, with the kids and stuff. Either they're so blind about it, like they don't know they have
Mhm.
mental trauma, or they do know about it, but they don't want to show it as a weakness,
Mhm.
or they're just so scared about it, they rather pretend like it's not there too. So the reason I say that we just had to bring you in because it's such a normal thing for you to bring those darkness out of people. Like for example, when Bree and I are chilling, we see you, we hang out. Yo, what's up, Fernando? How's it going? How's life? How are you guys? We're good. How's darkness? Oh yeah, how is darkness? You know, like we just get into that topic. Or
Yeah.
like I remember like it was a while, long time where you're like, oh, you guys know your each other's love language? And I was like, what? I was like, this sounds so good, but at the same time so scary. So Maria was like, I remember you were like, you're talking to Maria. Maria was like, yeah, and then you're talking to me. I'm like, oh man, I might. But
Gotcha.
that's why we love talking to you because it's just we can dive into those subjects and not be scared about it because we've gone through that trauma. So it's like
Yeah.
that's why I was like when Maria said the first one we got to do with Fernando. I'm like, yeah, it has to be Fernando. Mental health is like everybody needs that, even if they think they
Yeah.
don't need it. Even if it's, if I always said, if you said this, and I preach it every time, like I ever talk to random people. If the world can talk to a therapist once a month, we would be so much closer to world peace. It's crazy. Like,
Yeah. It's nuts. Yeah, it's crazy how it would impact everything, honestly. And I mean, obviously external circumstances play into our experience, right? So it's not to say that like everything's about you and you're up and that's why it is the way it is. It's more so like you are a factor just like the world is because you're part of it and you're in it. And it's so hard to look at your own blind spots. It's so hard to recognize these types of things, but there's so much good that can come from these conversations. And let me be the first to say that therapists are people too. And we get it wrong and we make mistakes because, we study, we try, we care and that kind of thing. But sometimes we are in pain too, or we're going through our own breakups, or we're going through, or, you know, I'm sure everybody has an understanding of like just sort of getting beaten down in life so much that you stop kind of progressing in your craft, let's say, right? You stop, like, let's say as a DJ, it's like you only listen to what you listen to, and you don't listen to any more new music, right? But new, really good music may open up, but you're sort of locked into that zone or whatnot, or dance moves, right? Yeah, how many dancers could we be like, all right, you're in the 90s, like your style is from the 90s versus the 2000s versus the 30s, like that kind of thing. So that happens with therapy too. And the only reason I mention all this is that it's important that people have a strong understanding of the necessity of therapy, even if their therapist and them isn't it. Because sometimes it isn't, or sometimes we evolve past that relationship. We need to, but it's like you still need to understand that the conversation is important because you are important, and having more awareness of self and how things can be improved or how we get in our own ways, right? Because if you can eliminate your own like the barriers that you place within your own life, at least then you have a better opportunity to overcome the obstacles outside of yourself, right? Because we all have obstacles outside of ourselves in one way, shape, or form or another, but like to combine them with the obstacles within ourselves, it's that much harder. But yeah, I think if people were open to the conversation, and then believe it or not, this is me talking to my own field. I think the more people are willing to engage in therapy, the more accountable therapists are going to have to be to being better, right? Because if everyone's going to therapy, then we all know what therapy feels like. It's like if everyone goes to a restaurant, we all know what scrambled eggs taste like. We all know what this, but sometimes with the lack thereof, Like if people don't know what scrambled eggs taste like, you might go to a restaurant and you're like, oh, I guess this is what scrambled eggs taste like, but it might not even be that good. Not to say that it's bad. I'm not talking about any specific person, but it is this idea that we have to do the work too as therapists. Like we can't tell you guys do these things, and then it's understandable if we don't, because we're humans too, and we gotta, it's hard to do the work, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it. um and yeah, like just helping, and I'm glad that you guys brought me on first. Yeah, because I think there's something to being able to talk about the dark things, I think that's why I also value my dark humor, not because I want to be insensitive, but because I'm relatable. I get it. I get the darkness, and sometimes it's better to laugh about something than it is to cry about it. But I still cry about it in private, or depending on who I'm with, I may cry in public, let's say. I probably won't go like on social media and say like all kinds of things, or like yell at people or anything like that, but as far as like our emotions, we need to be open to all of them, and when we're close to some of them, then like we're close to some of ourselves. So yeah, that conversation of talking to a therapist, I don't know, I usually recommend people, at any point in time, especially if they're in college or if they have a college close by them, because sometimes finances, right? Money is like one of the reasons why people may struggle in going to therapy and things of that nature. But you can go to a college where people are begging for the opportunity to just try and practice and things of that nature. Is it going to fix all of the things that you bring to them? Maybe not, but at the very least, it's going to expose you to a conversation you want to have, that you want to purge yourself of trauma and these painful things. And man, Sway, you were like on the money when it comes to trauma. I think people really don't understand how trauma works. And or I guess, and I don't know if it's that they don't understand how trauma works as much as they don't understand how ego works, right? Because they're like, I'm not traumatized, and I'm like, nah, you are. Yeah. Like whenever anyone is like, I don't need no therapy, I'm like, I didn't say okay, like it kind of shows, it's the irony of that, right?
Yeah.
People who would be like, I need nothing from a therapist, or not, like that kind of absolutism is kind of like saying I have nothing to learn about myself that I haven't learned already in my fill in the blank number of years of life. But the funny thing is, no matter how old you are, you think that, right? Like when you're 14, you're like, you guys don't know about what it is to be a teenager. I know with my 14, when you're like 21, you're like, I'm 21, I can drink now. I know everything I need to know about life, like 55, and that's one of the coolest experiences that I've had is working with people who are older than me. And sometimes they can be a little judgmental. Like I have a beard now, but when I shave, you guys know what I look like. So I just have like this baby face, and they're like, okay, little boy, what are you gonna teach me? Like, what are you gonna teach me about life? Like genuinely. And then and it's not that I'm teaching them about life. I'm just allowing the conversation of learning. I'm just like I'm sparking up a space where we can talk about life in a way that you might have already known, but you didn't learn it. Like sometimes we like have, I don't know, it's like a weird thing that I just said, like you might have known it, but you've never learned it. It's kind of like you ever eat something and then you feel like bloated or you feel gassy or whatever. It's like you eat it and you feel gassy, you eat it and you feel gassy, you eat it and then you go to get a test from a doctor and they're like, by the way, you are lactose intolerant. And it's like you always knew, but you just never learned it.
Yeah.
So it's like creating a conversation where we can learn more about the things that we might already know, because it's not for me to try to change someone and who they are. It's trying to help them understand who they are beyond their own reactivity or their own traumas and things of that nature. So also to your trauma, by the way, the trauma conversation, a lot of people also think the size of impact is like, like, well, I've never been raped, or I've never been molested, or I've never been, my parents never got divorced. I never had, so they like undo the trauma they have because they compare it to something they didn't have, right? And this is something that honestly, I want to say it's a learned behavior, because how many times have people said like, I want this, and they're like, don't you know, like there are kids starving in this other place, or that, like, so sort of just be grateful for what you have, which we think of it in like a positive message. Remember, we talk about the whole thing in balance, right? Yes, be grateful for what you have, but if you're hungry and you have, like you're hungry, you can't be like, well, someone else has food, or someone else doesn't have food or has had less food than you, and you're like, well, that's cool, I'm still hungry. So there's this balance of things. I always think it's also in the perspective of the moment that trauma took place, or that experience that took place, because sometimes we undervalue what experiences can cause trauma. Like a really good example that I like to share often in my office is like, a lot of parents will have a child, let's say toddler years, 5, 6 or something, like they're old enough, like if they go to a mall, the kid can walk around, but obviously not away. I feel like if, let's say there's a kid in that space, and sometimes, let's say this kid is very easily distracted, like he likes toys, go figure, right? Kids and toys. And so he likes toys or candy or something, and they're in the mall, and he's just like stuck on it, like, and then everybody else is walking, and then when parents notice, because usually parents notice before the kids notice, a lot of parents, at least, and I don't know, maybe this is the Latin community, but I think this is multicultural, right? Sometimes parents go, let's wait and watch, let's see what they'll do when they realize that they're lost, right? And so the parents will like navigate behind, like, like a sort of cover, so that they can see like what's going on with the kid, or is the kid going to notice that no one's around, this type of thing. And the kid usually notices at some point, and they have different reactions, but this kid might get scared, right? Where's my parents, where are my protectors, where are my guardians? And then they kind of freak out a little bit, understandably, and maybe that only lasts for like a couple seconds, and then mom or dad comes out and they're like, over here, and then the kid comes and runs, grabs her leg, and mom's like, oh, see, like you got to make sure, like, don't lose us, don't, make sure you don't, get lost in this mall or anything like that. Somebody makes a joke, or we'll leave you next time. That kind of thing. And I'm not saying that this is inherently wrong behavior, I'm just saying that this is human behavior that we can all be like, yeah, we can see that happening in a loving, good family. But what we might not recognize is, let's say that kid learned this foundational belief that exploring on my own was dangerous, and I'm never going to let go of my mom's leg ever again, because that was terrifying. That was 5 years old, like, this is all they know, is they were in the world, there were adults around them, they were lost. Now what if that lasted for 5 minutes? What if that lasted for 5 minutes? But let's just stick to the couple seconds, kid. And so if that kid became afraid of independence and exploration at that point, he's like, I'm never going to be away from mom, right? The parents might not realize, because the kid will behave appropriately. The kid will stick close by. The kid will do everything that the parents want them to do, but they don't understand that they're doing it because they're paralyzed with anxiety of the idea of not being that close, never wanting to experience that again. And that gets like stored in their body. This fear of independence, of exploration, of the unknown, it gets stored. And then that kid turns into an adult and forgets that memory, but his body has it. Like, he forgot that ever happened. Like, you ask them, did your parents ever leave you in the mall? No, never, right? But now in relationships, they might be more anxious in their attachment. They might be more clingy, because I don't feel comfortable that you want to go on this trip to Colorado to experience without me, like, because it's unsafe. There's no way, this type of thing, all stemming from something that we would see as like so small, like such a small experience. But to that kid, when he was 5, it changed everything. And then he stayed close by. So now he learned, or she learned, that this was the right way to be, so to speak, right? And it can go underneath the surface forever. But that was a traumatic event for that kid.
Yeah.
And so I use that example because, and then how will they be in monogamous relationships? How will they be if they're in a relationship with someone and that, you know, like, could they be very controlling of the behavior? Not controlling because they want to manipulate the person, although that is sort of what they're doing, but controlling because they're just so afraid of the out of what possibilities may lie where they can't control it, right? So this is where we all should ask ourselves, why do I fill in the blank? If it's coming from a place of health, you know, if I drink a lot of water because first of all, it's very delicious. And it feels good for me and everything like that, then fine. But if I drink a lot of water because I had a coach that told me that I was lazy and I was this and I was that, and if I couldn't even drink enough water, you know, like, I don't know, if I heard something that it's keep drinking water for health, but we want to let go of that baggage of like what pained us, like, because now we're operating out of anxiety, out of fear and stuff like that. And that's really what trauma is. Trauma is like is an experience that can shift and shape the way you believe about like kind of the world or your presence within that world. And yes, it's obvious that these like big experiences can trigger those things. But what's not obvious is that for young people, small experiences are big experiences. You know, we all know that our first kiss was probably, like we all know that we had that crush in middle school that was like, I didn't even know this person. I don't know anything about this person, but it meant everything to me when I was 13. It meant everything. So because it meant everything, it had the possibility of traumatizing me. Because now that I'm an adult, I can tell that that was like a little nothing. But when I was a kid, it meant everything. And if I'm 5 years old, what does it mean to have any experience? Because it's all the first time you're experiencing it, right? That's where, like, if people understood that trauma has an ability to affect our past in a way that we can't even fathom, because we might not even remember. And it's not that we don't even remember like being like beaten. We might not remember that one time that we went to go say hi to a friend at like elementary school, and then they didn't see us. And then we just sort of like, oh, like I waved my hand and now everybody saw me waving my hand. And the only person who didn't see it is the person I wanted to see it. And I'm just, oh my gosh. And then I just choose to stay in the back for the rest of that day. Like, we don't remember that, but it might have taught us a lesson that we were never meant to fully learn. But we also are too young to really know how to even express that as a lesson, you know? So yeah, fun times.
Anything that you'd recommend, like, for anyone to, like, I don't know, like a tip or a tool or something that helps us kind of pinpoint where like a triggering situation might be happening, maybe from a situation that we don't remember, but is there anything that we can ask ourselves or do to help us understand like that there's something that is being triggered?
Yes. I would always say the best tool that I think people can use, at least to start developing awareness, is journaling. Um, Journaling is huge. I was a kid that didn't like note taking. I didn't like showing my math or anything like that. So it's not coming from like a person who like read a ton and wrote a ton. Like, it's coming from the opposite person who's like, if someone told me journaling, I'd be like, no, thank you. Next tool, is there one that I can put on my smartphone? And it's like, yeah, actually journaling, right? Because that's the other thing, is that most people think of it as paper, but I use a digital journal on my phone, and I usually recommend my clients to. And part of it is learning that through consistency, it creates the epiphanies, right? Like, people will often say like, what do I journal? And I'm like, just journal, just anything, even just a single emoji. Get accustomed to teaching your body that there's a place for you to put your experiences, your feelings, and things of that nature. Because going back to the memory issue, is that we are often trying to focus on what we have to do. We may not remember how often we have been triggered by a spider or the idea of a spider, or triggered by this. So having a place where we can put in some of those experiences will give us a better awareness when we're no longer in that space, right? So memory is one of the biggest issues for people, and truly understanding themselves. And a lot of people also journal all the bad things. And remember, we talk about balance, and it's about journaling about all the different things. Journal about the good things, journal about what you like, because that's teaching you. A journal, to put it in an easy way, a journal should feel like an owner's manual, right? And that you're developing one, right? Because we each have our owner's manual. We each have, like, some people are afraid of clowns while other people are afraid of this, and some people like the smell of flowers while other people like the smell of pledge, like we all have our things, and putting those in a space allows us to retain the wisdom that we have from our own experiences. Because your body tells you when it tightens up in the chest, or when your stomach feels a little bit awkward, and when you're like, oh, I feel like lightheaded, or I feel tense, I tense. So all of these like physical manifestations, writing those things down, because not everyone clenches their jaw when they're mad, but some people do. And so, okay, so my version of it is like, I clench my jaw, or I do this, I have like my anger, and this is just me, Fernando, the person. I tend to try to understand and help, and I tend to allow myself or my body to experience more distress than I should, in order to try to keep the conversation going. It's almost like being too understanding, right? So if you're saying things and my body's agitated, I'm like, just hold out, like try to keep it going, try to understand what they're doing, so much so that I get too close to the point where my body wants to pop. And so I will like slam my fist, or for anybody who's ever played video games, like there's those moments where like I will find myself sort of squeezing the controller. And if I'm squeezing the controller that way, that means that I'm not having fun in the way that I should have fun. I'm more frustrated than having fun. So it might be best for me to, like, even though I'm engaged, clearly I want to play the game, but it might be better for me to like pause it for a second if I get to that level of frustration, because oftentimes we want to defeat frustration by going through it, right? Like whatever bothered me, I'm just gonna power my way through it. And sometimes, no, you gotta just put it down. Writing that in a journal, like writing about how it felt to do that, has led me to better understand my reactivity. And if I start to shake and I start to feel that way when I'm at like a 6 or 7, part of the issue of my past was that I was allowing the conversations to go into an 8 or 9 instead of stopping them at like a 4. Stopping my body at a 4 and being like, oh, I'm feeling it at a 4, right? It's not so much that I can't continue, but it'd be better for me to stop, reset, come back to homeostasis, and go back. So this is where you can learn from journaling, is how do I operate this entity that I am? And I have to understand what it feels like inside to better understand. Sometimes when I get so mad, I can't get my words out. Write that down, and writing down whatever version is for yourself. So really developing that. And then obviously you can talk about moments and experiences, but those moments and experiences should just be teaching you more and more about yourself. This person told me that I was a cheater at dodgeball. It made me so angry. I was so annoyed that they thought that I was cheating. Oh, but I don't get so bothered when they tell me that I suck. So for me, it feels worse being called a cheater than it does to be insulted for how I play. It must be that I have a more of a sensitivity to my integrity, like that, like I'm more sensitive when someone says that I'm doing something that is against my integrity than I am if they're saying that my performance is just not good. Like that just rolls off. I need to know that about myself so that I can better operate myself. So this is what I mean by like journaling an experience, figuring something out, expanding on that, and then being like, oh, I must be more sensitive to this, or I must be more resilient to that, or so on and so forth.
And keeping that in mind, what are like some misconceptions about mental health that you encounter?
some misconceptions about mental health.
Yeah.
The first one being that, people are either not, like, how do I put this? They either don't need it, or they're too fucked up that it wouldn't work. The irony of that, right? I don't need it. Either I don't need it whatsoever, or I just am the problem. I just it's just, I'm just angry. I'm just this, I'm just that, and I don't. So I think those misconceptions about ourselves and about others is important, right? Because we might think that they're just, for lack of a better words, they're just an asshole, or they're just a this, or they're just a that, or they're just a, and it's like, it's so much more complex than that. It usually is. It doesn't justify any of the behavior of the self or of the others. So I'm not justifying the behaviors. I'm only saying that it is reductionistic to bring ourselves to a point where we don't need to talk to anyone, or our things are just such our things that talking to someone would have no effect or impact on it. So it's that sort of, and it usually comes from people who don't have much experience in the conversation, right? I think even just you guys talking to me here, and anyone talking or watching this online, would recognize that there is something to this conversation, and being open to having it that is custom built for us, right? Because right now we're just talking about it in generalizations, and even within this, you can feel that there's information, there's stuff that just resonates. Imagine if this was a conversation just about you, Maria, like just about you and the things, and knowing that I'm not here, I have no agenda. I'm not here to make you more this, to make you more that. I'm here to understand where you want to be more yourself, and what are some things that might get in your way for that, because I think if everyone had a genie, or had a wish, that they would wish to be happy, that they would wish to be healthy, that they would wish, but then there's all these things that get in the way, that make us feel like we can't, or we wouldn't, or we're going to be shamed or blamed, or it's because of something, and so it's knowing that that process can happen, and sometimes it does sting a little bit, but yeah, I think just thinking that a single conversation won't make much of a difference, that's what I would say is the biggest misconception. Just have any conversation with a therapist, even once, and maybe you never go back to that therapist, but it opens you up to the idea of, like, maybe there is a therapist that would fit right for me, right? Because I think that people think of it like dating, or they don't think of it enough as dating, right? Imagine if you went on a date and you were like, well, this date didn't go well, I guess I'm not gonna date any other person ever in life, or I went on a date with a Latin girl, well, I guess Latin women will never, like, all of the Latina population, it's like, no, sometimes you go on you have a conversation with them, and maybe there's something that you like, but some things you don't, but maybe there's someone who's just like better fit for you, so those are some things that I would say to consider.
And Fernando, since they're like, therapy is such like a hard concept for some individuals, what would you advise for anyone that is like going through something, for them to like know, like, how can they recognize when they might need to seek help from a therapist?
Oh, if they're alive, they should go to therapy. I mean, if they have the ability to hear this video, or if they have, if they're alive still, they should be going to therapy. There's no question in my mind for that. How often? That's the variability.
That right there. That's a post. So you need to see a therapist. If you're alive, see
a therapist. Like, that's just it, You might only have to go once this year. You might only have to go twice this year, but you should go to at least open up the conversations, because you never know. I guarantee, and I know this is a weird thing to say, but I feel like having a conversation with anyone, there's going to be something that we unlock. Something. I'm not saying that it's something that has prevented them from living a happy life, but it might be something that has prevented them from even knowing they could have a happier one. right? And wouldn't you be curious if, you know, if there's a possibility to explore or exchange life in an even more fulfilled way? This is why I try to not speak against it, but I try to open up the conversation for more than people who are just in pain. Because obviously, if you're in pain, go to the dentist. Like that is like I if there's no other way of saying it. It's like you feel pain, go for sure. You don't feel pain, I'd still say go at least once. I mean, worst case scenario, you're like, I am really good. Can I see you in 6 months just in case? Yeah. So now you have a rapport with someone and you see them twice a year. So now we all know life happens. Wouldn't it be better to feel like you have a rapport with someone and a connection with someone on a professional level who will be there for you when life happens, versus now that life has already happened, right? Imagine knowing you already have something there in your back pocket for the time that XYZ happens. And then you don't have to go through that process of going, have to think of that, because imagine having the burden like of the pain of whatever you're going through, plus having to meet someone new. It's a very scary experience.
Well, too, also like finances, like not knowing like where to look or how to even go through that whole process.
It's like
Yeah,
it's like warranty or insurance.
yeah,
The car, like you don't expect to have a flat tire, but it's here to have warranty before it
yeah,
happens. So
absolutely. You know, like one of the posts I have on my Instagram or that I like to share, it's like buying a fire extinguisher once your house is on fire.
yeah,
It's like just have a fire extinguisher. Just, you
yeah,
know, just have one. And like you said, and especially like you mentioned, Maria, the finances, right? Knowing, can I afford this, right? What if the trauma that I just went through is financial instability? Even less likely for me to get this help, because now I'm not even sure if my current lifestyle can afford, like if I can afford that, much less adding something else. So learning what is out there in terms of opportunity or engagement, like building these rapports, knowing that there's a wide range of financial options for people in different places. But having all that information, especially when you don't feel like you need it, is way better of an experience than needing it and then having to figure out all of those things simultaneously.
Yeah, because it is a lot. And Fernando, do you happen to have like any tips or any way that people like to make it easier for people to find a therapist?
Oh, for sure. So there's a really good website that I always recommend people called Psychology Today. It's a magazine as well, but it's kind of like a directory. It's kind of like Tinder, but for therapy, right? So you go on this, you put in your zip code, and then it will give you basically, I mean, most therapists know about this. So usually the introduction for most therapists into these sort of directories is probably Psychology Today. There's a couple other ones too that are also being grown, and who knows, maybe by now other ones have been rivals and competitive, but I do know Psychology Today is pretty consistent. So you put in a zip code and then it just shows you a picture and a profile of all of the therapists within that zip code and like their general locations and things of that nature. And so, oh, go ahead. Did you have?
Yeah, is there like anything that you recommend like to help people find a therapist, sorry. Like, are there any key factors or things that they should keep in mind to know, okay, I'd more likely go with this person?
Oh, so like let's say like a fit. Like, do they fit right
yeah,
for
like
me?
this therapist fits
Just
my
Okay, yeah,
I've
for
been
sure.
like to find therapists and I'm like, I don't know, like, like reading the description and their background, is like they all sound great, but I
Yeah.
don't know which one to follow.
So here's like the ultimate tip, the like, legit tip, right? You have to call them. Like you have to talk to them. Most therapists do offer free consultations. Like I know I offer like 20 minutes. Sometimes it pushes even further than that, right? Um, and while seeing them, so let's say you have that directory, you see them on there, right? I would encourage people to, call at least, three or four of them. Like just have a conversation with them, listen to the cadence of their voice, hear that, because that's one thing at a somatic level. Let's say like you might have a personality that the information might be good, but the way they deliver it, you don't like. And that's okay. And it's okay to go to another therapist for that. Or the way that they speak resonates with me. I find them in, they capture my attention. Okay, that's cool. I feel more. So let's say gender, right? Some people feel more comfortable with a guy, some people feel more comfortable with a girl, depending on what it is that they want to talk about. And sometimes they want the complete opposite experience, right? So there are many men who would prefer to have a female therapist because they want to hear the female perspective, they want to hear that experience, or women who may want the male perspective as a therapeutic perspective as well. So it's really first knowing some of the things that would register better for you. Some of those things might be worth challenging, right? Like, I don't know if I can trust the guy therapist, or I don't know if I can trust the girl therapist. Why? And not saying that you shouldn't or you should or anything. But what is that? Are all men or all women? And if that's the case, then that might be something worth challenging. But let's say I was to say, I really want to have a conversation about like erectile dysfunction. And it would be really, I don't know, like it feels like that's hard enough as it is to then talk to a woman about that. I don't know if that's, I'd rather talk. That seems, okay, so this is kind of like checking in with ourselves. So the first thing is somatic. Do I like their vibe? Do I like their presence and how they describe themselves? And I would encourage having at least one question for them that would let you know that about them. Like ask them any, I'm trying to think of what a, this is just me being hard on my fellow therapist. One of my questions I ask is like, do they go to therapy themselves? All right. I think that that's a great question to ask a therapist, because if they're like, no, not really, then I'd be like, okay, next. Like, that's just me because I'm like, you got to believe, you know, or why not? Like asking, like talking to them, and not to get too into their personal life. It's not about them and what they do in therapy. It's really like how do you believe in therapy? Why do you believe in therapy? Asking some of these questions to see like how their responses will give you like, oh yeah, they're in my vibe. Some people want a more research, numerical, statistic oriented therapist who gives you like the accurate facts and the percentages and things of that nature. And that might be more akin to what they're looking for, is that they want a therapist who's not going to sugarcoat it. I don't want to hear about energies. I don't want to hear about this. I just want to have a better understanding of like attachment, and I want to have a better understanding of coping mechanisms. And okay, if that's what you want, ask more questions than that. Other people might want someone who's more into astrology and who's open in different ways, who's studied things like psilocybin retreats and ayahuasca. They may want that kind of experience. So you want to have that kind of information from them. And then I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Oh, remember we talked about balance? I guess you want to have someone who can balance comfort and challenge well. Right? Because comfort is often what people are needing in difficult times. And so if they feel a sense of comfort with someone, then it's great. It feels good. They feel a sense of like release, relief, that kind of thing, right? But it's usually not going to create growth unless that person were to create it themselves. So they became more comfortable, and now that they're more comfortable, they're feeling better. Now they themselves are exercising more, doing things more because they feel more comfortable, which is fine. That's a possibility, right? But if you're feeling better, but you don't necessarily get anything that's challenging you, well, then you're probably going to go back out into the world the same way you came into that room. So it's knowing like I want to be comforted, but I also need to be challenged to look at the areas that I won't look, or to do the things that I'm apprehensive of doing for reasons that are not healthy. Let's say, if you don't want to do certain things because of a healthy reason, then of course, right? But having that balance of comfort and challenge, because one of the common things that I hear is people will say like, I went to a therapist and it felt like we were friends. Like it felt cool. Like I like that, but I didn't feel like I and it's like, that's okay. They didn't challenge you enough. And that's okay. And sometimes that just means the evolution of now you have to go to a better therapist, or you have to go to a different therapist that is not, it can be better in terms of insight and stuff, but I prefer the word different, because sometimes you know, different is what we need. So having someone whose background is in dance might be what we need, but maybe having someone whose background is in painting is what we need. And so the difference was what made it better, not that they were better or worse than the other therapists because of XYZ reasons, you know. They might have been better for you in that state, in that moment. And so being open to that idea as well.
So you practice individual, couples, and family therapy, correct?
Yes.
What would you say are the differences in between? And would you say that do we all need them all?
Ye with each person, so I'll answer the first one and then it'll answer the second one. So individual therapy is obviously just with one person, right? And we're regarding whatever situations they may have. Sometimes it's a particular thing that they want to work on. Sometimes they're just like, I'm here, I've always wanted to be in therapy and wanted to learn more, so let's talk, right? Every time you add another person to the mix, let's say, it's more of like a multiplication or like exponential differences. So let's say we're doing couples therapy, right? So now it's really like two individuals plus the relationship in between them. So it's almost like you have three clients. You have the person, and the relationship between them. Because if they weren't together and you saw them individually, you'd probably have some of the same conversations. This thing happened to me when I was younger, this, and this is why I do this, and this is, you know, so you're helping them navigate themselves as individuals, but then you're also helping them navigate those two individuals with each other. And sometimes they trigger each other. Sometimes people do things with each other that they would never do with anyone else because of how triggered they are, because of how much they care, and because of, you know, so that's where couples counseling is not only helping to understand the individuals, but the dynamic in between them, and then helping them understand some of the standards that are healthier in the same way you would do that with individuals. But most people think like, you know, within couples, it's hard, like everybody lives their own life, their own way. And it's like, well, there are some factors that we know, like there's an easy one. If you cheat on someone and they don't like that, it probably won't last. Like, it's just a standard, right? Now, some people, if you cheat on them, they may, to maintain the relationship, just cheat in response. But now they're stuck in this toxic pattern of like cheating, deception, but they might stay together. The irony. So it's like, just cheating doesn't inherently mean that people separate. So helping them understand like their dynamics, what do they bring to the table, and what do they want from the relationship. And then when we go to family, it's knowing that it's easier and harder because your family members, you can't leave. So if you're a teenager living in a household that something is not good happening with the adults in that household, well, I can't just be like, well, I don't think this is the relationship for you, so you should move out. You know, now if they were an adult and they were living in a house with a couple, let's say, right, and they're in their 20s and they're sharing the space, we all know that there could be a circumstance where that relationship of that couple could be so toxic that it's like, hey, I know that you live in this house, it might be better for you to move out and have your own space. So, but you can't tell that to a 10-year-old. So family becomes even more challenging in certain ways because you have to help them navigate their experiences and their limitations. And so it's like they have to commune to some degree. Obviously, if it's unhealthy to like an unsafe degree, that's different. But as long as safety, inherent physical safety and things of that nature aren't a factor, then it's like you might have to deal with the fact that like your mom always comments on your weight. You know, now she's a part of therapy, that can be a conversation. Why is that always a comment? You know, why? And now we're able to like open it up, but it's kind of like couples therapy, because you remember the two individuals and the dynamic in between them. But now if you can imagine that with four people, it's the dynamic in between these two and these two and these two and these three and these three and then these four. like, so all of those are extra clients that you're having to layer on top, right? Because what if someone feels like, you know what, you and our son always gang up on me. Well, now it's a dynamic of 3 people and one person feeling like they're being ganged up by the other 2, which is, so it just keeps like kind of multiplying, not just, so I guess, let's see, I'm going to try to do this. In a family of 3, you have the 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's like 6 clients. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of. So yes. So that's the difference between them. So to better explain that, but what was the second part of that question? Oh, if you all need them, right? So let's say in that family of 4, that dynamic might only be in between 2 people that needs to really be mended. So they might need family therapy, not only for themselves, but for the sake of the other 2 as well, for the family dynamic, right? Because obviously other people get involved. You don't want to see, you know, if mom and my sister are fighting all the time, it's going to affect me, it's going to affect dad. So I would say it's something worth considering. At the very least, individual therapy should help uncover all of the other areas that we might need to address as well.
Okay, that's awesome. And a question that popped up is how, like, when it comes to these types of relationships, like, for example, what if you or there's someone there's someone that needs therapy with a family member, but there's, you know, the generational differences. And
Mhm.
I don't want to call anyone out, but it's usually the older generations that have more trouble accepting therapy and like the
Sure.
therapeutic concepts. And so what approach would be best for either, or maybe the elder in this case needs to approach the youngest and they don't seem to know how to approach the subject?
For sure. So the first part of that answer is it's not fair, but it's true. In the same way that whoever has the most experience with technology tends to lead the household in technology, right? It's not necessarily the oldest person, which we all know. It's like, I don't have my abuela teach me how to use AI. That's not happening. You know, like, so whoever's leading is whoever has the most experience within technology. So I would say the same thing might end up being true for mental health, right? So you may have a teenager in a household of people who may not even consider mental health, but because they have considered it more, they might end up being the leader in the house for mental health. Is it fair that someone younger has, like, let's say, that burden? Not necessarily. In the same way, it's not fair that technology would be their burden too. They would probably have to show their parents how to get on Instagram or how to, you know, like, that's very common unless people have kept up with technology. And I see technology and mental health no difference. You know, they both have evolved in vast quantities over the last few years, right? I don't expect some people from the older generation to know how to operate the newest iPhone and everything, because when it multiplied so fast, it just went so quickly and became such a prevalent thing. So, and then the same thing would be true for mental health. So how to get them engaged in that starts with the individual. It starts with that younger person, because they already have an interest in it. So they would ideally be exposed in some way to therapy, whether it is, if they're that young, maybe they go to their guidance counselor. They have school appointed therapists, a lot of therapists that are, what are they called? Like a grant, like government grants. So they may not even have to pay for that therapy, because they would most likely, there's tons of programs that qualify for students in middle school, high school, elementary, that kind of thing, right? To get therapy for free, or at a very reduced cost, you know. And then in college, most colleges include certain number of sessions in their tuition, so technically they paid for it anyways. So they might as well use what they're already paying for, because it's usually included in the tuition. And then beyond that, getting their family involved It's a challenging, there isn't like a one size fits all answer for that, as much as I would say them creating a difference within their own world would be something that could help motivate others for that, right? So often, one of the best things that I would say, if you really want someone to listen to you, like really want someone to listen to, give them an example of what it is like to be listened to. Be a be such a good listener to that person, and recognize that, have conversations about how you want to listen to them and you want them to also be able to listen to you, but give them the turn first. Let them understand how good it feels to get that experience, and then see if they're willing to give it back, or at least have the interest in giving it back in some way, shape, or form. And if they feel like they don't do this very well, they might have the idea of, maybe how can I do it better? I like what you did. I like how you gave me this thing. You gave me this listening, truly listening ear. You didn't judge me. You were just trying to be open to my perspective and all that kind of stuff. And then asking for it in return tends to be like a much better way of approaching it.
That's awesome, Fernando.
For sure.
Just super quick question. How long does it typically, or would you say does it typically take to see progress in therapy?
So that's in a sense a kind of a loaded question, because it's going to be by the person. I've seen people in one session have insight that I see may take other people months. The good news is the interest in the self is usually the gauge, right? If they're coming to couples therapy because of how fucked up the other person is only, they take longer, because they aren't focusing on what they need to do for themselves. And it's not to say that they're wrong either. You know, it's not to say that they are, like, the other person isn't more problematic or isn't causing this or isn't causing that. But we also need to go, well, how do I maintain this cycle? So let's say I'm with an alcoholic in a romantic relationship. It's important to know that it's not just the fact that they drink alcohol that is, let's say, and then they get verbally aggressive. They say all kinds of, obviously we're like, this is not okay, right? And I'm not blaming the individual who didn't drink alcohol. It's not their fault, but they are a part of a sequence of events that keeps cycling. So what do they do in response to that? Do they just fight with them and then they discuss it later on and then they make up and then they're fine and then they just wait for the next time that it happens again? Well, now after they do that once or twice or three times, well, now you're enabling it. You're not necessarily creating a set of consequences or repercussions of the experience that forces us to change course. It's like, now we're just on this cycle. Now we're just on this wheel, versus like, hey, I'm not trying to stop you from drinking. I'm not saying that you can't drink. All I'm saying is that, like, for us to be in relationship, I need for you to go to therapy about your drinking. And if you're not going to therapy about your drinking, I don't feel like you should be drinking. Like, just so now it's their boundary setting. It's there. So this is where I would say, depending on people's willingness to not only reflect on what's happening outside of them, but really what's happening within myself. How am I part of this? Even if I'm not in it, I didn't drink at all. It's easy to see that and go, we're not a part of it because I didn't drink at all. But you are a part of it, because when they drank and when they did this was the response. This is how you chose to re-engage, and all of these types of things. However interested you are in that, that's how fast we tend to process things. Now, obviously, you know, there are certain things that take more time, like grieving, right? If I'm grieving the loss of my pet, it's probably very impactful. And it can be, depending on the relationship that I have with that pet, compared to grieving the loss of my significant other, right? And so if I'm trying to feel better next week, I might actually be asking too much of myself. Getting better isn't getting better just faster. It's getting better authentically, truly healing. If I've hurt myself and I've injured my Achilles and I can't run, when they put a cast on me, I shouldn't start breakdancing. because it's going to take time for that to mend. And knowing that and being okay with what that process is and being able to be fulfilled even in that state of rehabilitation, let's say, to the most that we can be. So these are all things that factor into how quickly or how long it will take. I'll tell you, it's not about having more therapy sessions in a therapy room. It's about having a therapy session and then having more therapy sessions out of a therapy room. You can go to a therapy session for 1 hour. Anyone who's watching this right now has not talked to me, hasn't engaged in this conversation with me. But if this is kind of like being in therapy, and if hopefully I sparked some inspiration, some ideas, people might go, you know what? I might try that digital journal. You know what? I might, and there's going to be plenty of people who don't. The ones who try it, the ones who go, you know what? Like, I'm going to create therapy for myself outside of the office, they tend to have the most progress because they really are taking therapy, which is what we're having within our conversation right now, and they're applying it to every minute outside of this conversation. But at least this is a starting point. So,
Fernando, what would you tell someone that says that therapy is not working for them?
I would probably say, well, a couple of questions. One, what does it mean to work? Like, what is their definition of working for it, right? Some people will come into couples counseling and they want me to fix their relationship that is clearly unhealthy. Now I can tell them what needs to be done, but let's say there's the presence of domestic violence. I refuse to tell anyone that they should stay in a space where they're not safe from domestic violence. Now, if it's like it happened one time only kind of a thing, and they're like, it's never happened again, this, then I'm not going to be like, no, it happened one time, so you need to move out, even though it happened 4 years ago, right? So there's context in surrounding these type of situations. But if there cannot be, like, let's say, the guarantee of physical safety in a household, then I would say that they aren't ready for therapy together. There's too much risk, right? We're talking about therapy, we're talking about the dark stuff, and when the dark stuff comes up, it comes up, and you might not like what you hear, and it's important that regardless of what you hear, you're both safe. So for them, here's a situation where they may want it to work. Like, I want us to be able to stay together and to have these dark conversations. And our therapist doesn't think that it's safe, and so we don't want to see that therapist anymore. It's like, well, you have to know that there's this hierarchy of needs. And if we're going to talk about the fact that you have resentments, and we're going to talk about some dark stuff, and that's going to potentially put one, if not both of you, at physical risk, especially if you have a child in that home, then I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, like, you guys might need to take some physical space until you can guarantee that physicality, So what is working, or not what is working, but what does it mean to be working, is the first question that I would ask. The second question I would ask is, if there's nothing inherently unhealthy preventing it from working, right? Like, let's say they're individual, there's nothing safety related and things of that nature, then it goes, okay, well, what have been the suggestions or the challenges that have been proposed to you, right? So if someone's like, hey, you really need to journal about your relationship, and the other person's like, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, we need to work on coping mechanisms. And then they come back, yeah, I didn't really work on any of the coping mechanisms. Well, now we have to, so this person is expecting for things to change just from being present in the room, but not necessarily. And so then that's where more conversations have to take place. Are we making it too hard for them? Are they not interested? Are they so caught up with life that they don't think about themselves any other time outside of the therapy office? So it just provokes more conversations. But at the very least, one thing that they can do is pause on that therapist. If they feel like they've had all the conversations, they've said everything, and they're just not getting, pause on that therapist. It's not to say like you'll never see them ever again. Go to another therapist. See if the conversation shifts or changes in any way. See if the perspective they bring is any different. And and expose yourself to the same topic of conversation with another therapist who may have a different background. Oftentimes a lot of the people who come to my office, some of them are brand new, have never had an experience with a therapist before ever, but many of them have had, and they'll go, this is different. Like, this is therapy, it's similar, but it's very different, this experience. And I would assume the same thing would be if any of my people ended up going to someone else, that it would be different. I want to be the kind of person as a therapist that's so badass that whenever people go to other people after me, they're like, I want to be like, good. I'm just kidding. No, if anything, I would like to train those other therapists as well if possible. But the presence of another therapist who is quote unquote better than me would just drive me to want to be better. I want to understand this person. I want to understand what they brought to the table, versus like, they broke up with me. It's like, okay, that's okay. They could have done that for many different reasons. So that's where I would say, at the very least, if you feel like it's not working, try another therapist, and have that conversation and see if you get, if you go to 10 therapists and they're all telling you the same thing, like, you need to do this thing and you don't do that thing, well, now we should have another perspective that's like, okay, but sometimes they can say the same thing in a different way and it resonates differently, or they'll say something completely different and that actually hit the spot just where it needed to be hit, so to speak.
Fernanda, and what would how can family and friends support someone that is going through therapy, especially if, like how we discuss it's a family that is, has a very traditional view about it, or maybe they have never, maybe the person that is going to therapy has never spoken openly or is afraid, and whatever. What would you advise the family or friends to do when they're dealing with someone that is going through therapy?
So you remember that whole concept of comfort versus challenge when it comes to like the therapist?
Yeah.
I would say it's the same thing. For friends or people wanting to understand how to support one another in general, understanding one, what they need, right? And what they may be looking for is important. So like, how do they want to be comforted or challenged within this space, right? Because to support someone might mean, hey man, I really need to stop eating McDonald's. So like, let's just try not to eat McDonald's. So if he's like, you know what, let's just go to McDonald's one day. Supporting them might be like, hey man, you told me to tell you, let's not do that, right? So that might be support, right? But support could also look like, well, I know you haven't eaten McDonald's, or, and they're like, yeah, like, I just want to celebrate that I haven't eaten McDonald's. So is it okay if we get like, I just want to get like one thing of nuggets, split it together and be like, this was like our 1 year anniversary kind of thing, and then maybe don't eat McDonald's anymore after that again, for another year or whatever, but it's more comforting. It's really asking and understanding, like, how would they like to be best supported by their family member, or by their friend, or by, because even though I'm a therapist and I feel like I have a lot of wisdom and I have a lot of guidance that I can share, and maybe I even overshare at times, I still am very aware that I need to ask for permission, consent to advising, right? Because I don't know what they're really wanting from me. So having a conversation about what they do want from me, so that I have a better sense of, hey, is this a conversation that you're trying to have with Fernando Campos, licensed mental health, licensed marriage and family therapist, about your relationship, or about your job, or about your problems? Like, are you trying to get some insight from the therapist, or, are you trying to ask, like Taboo? Or are you trying to ask Mufasa? Are you trying to ask, the different names that I may have had, Beatties, like my family nickname, and you're just telling me what you're going through, and all you really want is like a hug, or all you really want is for me to just be there and like to feel you, so that you don't feel alone in this experience. I'm not going to tell you that I know exactly how you feel, but I'm going to tell you that I'm going to do my best so that you don't feel alone in that experience, if that's what you want. I'm not trying to fix your experience. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you that you're here with someone. Then that's how they want to be supported. So asking those questions of, between comfort and challenge, like, how would you like for me to best support you? And if you have you know, if I want to support you a certain way, I can offer that as an option, but then you have the right to tell me that you do or don't want that. It's kind of like if I were to be like, hey, you know, I got today in terms of like the bill, like if we're getting lunch together, and some people would be like, no, I'd rather split it. Okay, that's okay. I can offer, you know, I'd like to be able to journal and text with you and message from time to time about like, you know, how we're doing in life. Would you like that? Is that, you know, it doesn't have to happen if don't feel pressure, but you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, all of these are different options.
Awesome. And Fernando, one last question.
Sure.
Close it up. You spoke to us about like things that people could do, like writing a journal to help their mental health. Are there any other tips or tools that you would recommend people to practice every day to improve or work on their mental health, even if maybe they're not even aware of it?
It's a good question. And you said every day, so I'm going to try to give you something that can be done daily that I think is really healthy, right? I think, ooh, and this one is going to touch on some potentially dark areas, but bear with me, right? Every day when we wake up, we should appreciate our individuality, meaning like recognize that you are an individual in your path, in your journey, in your story, right? Because even when you have family, even when you have a significant other, even like at some point in time, you know, if all goes well, let's say, like you may outlive people, which means that you will eventually have to wake up essentially alone physically, you know, maybe not, you'll have people and family, things of that nature, right? We get so lost in our relationships and our duties and everything. I'm a mom. I'm like, before you were a mom, you were your name, you know? I'm a therapist. Before I was a therapist, I was taboo. Before I was taboo, I was Fernando Campos Torres El Tercero, born in Brooklyn, New York, 1984, you know, and freaking, I drank a lot of milk. My parents told me that I drank gallons of milk all the time, you know, like there's aspects to myself before the role that I play in society, and to reconnect with that part of ourselves, because these other things sometimes shift, sometimes change, sometimes the relationship changes and you're no longer in that relationship for one reason or another. It doesn't mean that you guys even broke up. Sometimes you don't work that job, sometimes you're an athlete and then you get injured, and now if you only saw yourself as an athlete, first of all, it can be very painful. Same thing for dancers. If you're only a dancer, know that you're so much more than that. You know, that's just the facet of you that has had the most nurturance, but it's still a facet of you. And there are facets of you that you've never even explored. Maybe you're an even better therapist than a dancer. Maybe you're a better chef than a dancer. Maybe you're better this than a that. All of those things, the only way you know those things is if you can like reconnect to like the individual that plays those roles. And I think every morning before we go anywhere, we can look ourselves in the mirror and kind of acknowledge that, recognize that part of ourselves, that this is where our story is today. And it may have characters, it may have people in it, it may have jobs and all these other things that are connected to it. But to give the best version of yourself to all of those things is to acknowledge that version of yourself first, and then to be a good mom or dad, to be a good therapist or dentist or dancer or DJ, but you have to be okay first. Because if I fuck with that original person, if I don't let that original person sleep well, their parenting goes down, their therapy skills go down, their DJing, everything else is impacted by that. So making sure that we're also in relationship with ourselves, not just being ourselves, but actually in relationship. And I think that's something that we can kind of do every morning. It doesn't have to be a long thing, but it's just sort of like recognizing, if you journal, then even better, right? But remembering that all the things that we have put around us are part of this journey, but I am who's walking this journey. And then being grateful for what we have, and then it kind of just expanding the conversation from there. But at least starting off by looking ourselves and just remembering that we are an individual on our paths.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Hashtag
Yeah, hashtag deep. Yes. I can get lost in these thoughts. This is what I do most of the time. That's why I was super excited you invited me to this. I was like, man, I can vibe and just talk and all that stuff. It's so much fun. Hopefully it impacts somebody, or I mean it impacted me, because honestly I'm learning from the conversation too, and I'm like, oh, this would be pretty cool. Yeah. So yeah.
And us. Thank you, Fernando, so much
Mm.
for joining us today, and thank you for everyone that watched and joined us. We really hope that you took something with you today. And honestly, guys, we're just excited. Thank you again for joining us today, and we can't stop, won't stop.
Can't stop, won't stop. Nice, awesome.